It is Thursday, October 27th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the Week 8 preview edition of the podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And Jared, we got a near full slate to go through this week. Only 2 teams on bye. I'm not sure why the NFL insists on doing that to us, because looking to next week, we got 6 teams out. Something to be planning for this week. We've already been through the waiver runs for most leagues, but you might want to go ahead and take a look at who's going to be missing from your lineup next week and snag some guys off the waiver wire, especially if you got free pickups in your league right now.
Yeah, use our strength of schedule page if you're an insider. I use that a bunch just to sort of, look when guys are going to be in bye, then also see, who has the best matchups in those weeks where I'm going to need a spot starter at, especially at quarterback and tight end, the onesie positions.
Can certainly use that as well to look at trade options, see who might have a really good schedule the rest of the way. And especially if you're in a good situation record-wise, if you're pretty sure you're going to make the playoffs, you can even look further ahead and start targeting players with good playoff schedules in your trades in your league. But we're here to focus on Week 8. We're going to go through the entire slate. We're going to start, as usual, with the Thursday night game. It's Baltimore at Tampa Bay. The Bucks by 1.5 in this one. Over under 45.5. That's fewer points than it probably should have been if we got the kind of teams that we were assuming we would on both sides of this matchup. But that's not what we've got right now, Jared. On the Ravens side, injuries first. We've got questionable for tonight: Gus Edwards, Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews. Bateman put in a full practice Wednesday. No practice at all for Mark Andrews this week. Any concern for any of those guys missing this game?
No, like you said, Bateman full practice Wednesday. I expect him to play. Edwards limited all week. I'm assuming they just wanted to take it easy on him after his first game back and then on the short week here. Not a great situation for Gus Edwards. I'll be curious to see exactly how much work he gets tonight with the short week and just a second game back. Andrews, I'm expecting to play him, and he was in the same boat last week. Andrews' playing time was right in line last week where it's been all season. He obviously had the goose egg, only had the 2 targets. I'm sure the knee was an issue. Baltimore also only threw it 16 times last week. They went super, super run heavy. I'm hoping that's not going to be the case going forward. But I mean, especially with Travis Kelce and bye, like I can't imagine sitting Mark Andrews despite this knee thing and despite his 0 last week.
Oh yeah. If Andrews is active, I'm playing him. And we'll see. I can't imagine that they will normally go that run heavy regardless of how game flow goes. Certainly the Bucks look vulnerable coming off of the way that they played the Panthers last week, but things aren't normally going to go as poorly for them as they did in that particular game. They still will not have Akeem Hicks up front. They were hoping to get him back this week, but it looks like it'll at least be one more game for him. So the run defense does remain vulnerable. Like you said, short week for Gus Edwards isn't great. He was healthy, played last week, does have the knee, though, that's probably somewhere short of completely, fully healthy. And it's also worth noting that even though he came out the clear stat leader among Ravens running backs last week, it's not like he dominated playing time at the position.
Yeah, exactly. Edwards played just 36% of Baltimore's offensive snaps. He handled just 36% of the carries, got just 1 target. Edwards benefited from Baltimore going so run heavy. So I'd be careful not to overrate his week 7. I think Edwards is still like an RB3. And especially the lack of pass catching work is going to kind of make him, a lower floor weekly option than you'd probably like.
Yeah, I had one user in our Discord saying I'm on the fence on whether to play Gus Edwards or these other guys at wide receiver in my flex spot for PPR. And it was 5 receivers that we have all ahead of Gus Edwards in the flex rankings this week. So don't overrate last week from Gus Edwards, but he's certainly usable. Kenyon Drake is also usable at a certain level because of how close their playing time was last week. I would hope you don't have to, but usable for no doubt some teams that do need to. The matchup also gets better for the Baltimore passing game in this one because the Bucks do not have cornerback Carlton Davis. They will not have defensive back Antoine Winfield. Winfield's been typically a safety over his first few seasons. This year, he's actually played a lot more slot corner than he has safety. So that's a significant adjustment for the matchup for this one. 2 of their top cover guys out. Specifically, probably the Ravens most likely to benefit from those absences are Devin Duvernay, who has run most often from the side of the field that Carlton Davis has run most often so far this year, and Mark Andrews and anybody else in the slot, because like I said, Winfield has been primarily a slot corner. So the matchup nicer in the middle of the field. Let's hope that helps Lamar Jackson get going.
Yeah, Lamar's really struggled, four weeks in a row now, passing guys. The rushing has kind of kept him okay for fantasy, but this is a decent spot for him with all those Bucks injuries in the secondary. I would struggle to use Duvernay in a season-long league, assuming Rashad Bateman plays. Bateman last week again, Baltimore only threw it 16 times, but Bateman got 5 of the 16 targets. 31% target share, so that was encouraging. I think Bateman, remains in the wide receiver 3 mix, assuming he plays tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Duvernay more somebody to keep in mind for like showdown purposes tonight.
Yes. Yep.
On the other side, the Bucks have ruled out Russell Gage. Julio Jones is a game time decision, so it should be a high ceiling week for Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. It's also worth remembering though the Ravens sit 8th in pass defense DVOA, so it's not a gimme matchup. Basically neutral for wide receiver scoring so far. If you look at our adjusted fantasy points allowed page.
Yeah, I mean, you're playing Godwin and Evans. They're strong target bets. I think Russell Gage being out helps Cade Otton too, who I think remains a decent spot start option this week. We know Cam Brate's already out of this game. Otton's route rate was down to 73% last week after being 90+% in the first game Cam Brate missed. But he still saw 5 targets last week, caught 4 for 64. Baltimore's been pretty rough against tight ends so far this season. So again, I think Otton's a decent option if you don't have one of the top 5 or 6 tight ends.
I agree. I picked him up in one league this week to cover Travis Kelce's bye. Tom Brady. So the matchup's okay for him, kind of similar to Lamar Jackson. I mentioned that the Ravens have been solid against the pass. And even with that huge Tua Tagovailoa game back in week 2, the Ravens sit just 15th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. So it's not a gimme matchup. Tom Brady is fine. And I wouldn't move him up from where we have him in the rankings currently. There is going to be one guy that we talk about later that I would like to move down our rankings. So I wouldn't be shocked if we end up getting a good Tom Brady passing game tonight, but I'm not going to go in betting on 350 and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, we have him quarterback 10 in our rankings. That feels too high, if anything. He's been quarterback 18 or worse in 5 of his 7 games this season. And that was a ugly game against Carolina. Now, I mean, Mike Evans drops a 65-yard touchdown on like the second play of the game. That game probably goes differently if he catches that. So, I mean, I'm not, and you don't got to bench Tom Brady, but I'm not super confident about his, status, his fantasy value, both for this game and for the rest of the season. I mean, I have concerns about this offense.
Yeah, and it also is worth noting that I think he's only had one game where he threw more than 1 touchdown pass. So
yes.
if that
his
were
touchdown rate.
Yeah, if he threw 2 in a couple more games, he would be higher than that QB 18 level. But certainly it's been overall disappointing, especially relative to last year. So a decent spot. Don't go crazy with your expectations.
Yep.
It would probably be a good game for the Bucs offense if they want to. I'm not even sure that they desire, but to get the running game going in this one.
Yeah, Baltimore's 23rd in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA. They're much weaker against the run than the pass. I'm kind of giving Leonard Fournette a mulligan for last week, getting blown out by the Panthers. Just a bad game for the offense in general. Fournette is still top 10 among running backs in both expected fantasy points and actual fantasy points over the last 4 weeks now. He still remains ahead of Rashad White, although the snap counts did get a bit closer last week. I think that was at least partly due to that game being over in the fourth quarter.
Mm-hmm. Denver against Jacksonville in London on Sunday morning. The Jags by 2.5 on their second home field, over under 39.5 for this game. Russell Wilson is the top story because he's deemed himself ready to roll. He's been limited in practice so far, but definitely not limited on that plane ride over to London. I'm not using him in fantasy. I'm not sure his return really means anything for anybody else on the offense.
It might be bad news for Jerry Jeudy. I mean, Jeudy had his most efficient game of the season pretty easily with Brett Rippon under center last week, and seemed to be Rippon's first look on a lot of those plays. So when we originally had Brett Rippon in there, when we got the news that it's likely going to be Russell Wilson, I moved Jeudy down our rankings a bit, Cortland Sutton up our rankings a bit. Sutton's just been more efficient with Russell Wilson this season. So I think that's the only fantasy impact. I think both those wide receivers, though, are just wide receiver 3s in a pretty tough matchup, and with Wilson struggling and dealing with the hamstring.
Yeah, that matchup has dipped from what it looked like earlier in the season. Jacksonville is just kind of in the middle of the league now at everything on defense and on the wrong side of the middle in DVOA overall. I think that more scary than playing anything against the Jacksonville pass defense is playing anything from this Denver offensive backfield.
Yeah, I mean, we have no Mike Boone this week, which helps. I mean, it's going to, they signed Marlon Mack off the Niners practice squad. I'm not even sure if he's going to be active. So I think it turns into a 2-man committee versus a 3-man committee. I think, Melvin Gordon led in snaps and touches last week. I think he's the better play, but, no more than a running back 3, because I do think it's going to be close to a 50-50 split between Gordon and Latavius Murray.
Mm-hmm. In the Jacksonville offense, this matchup mutes the upside of anybody that you might want to play. Denver's third toughest on QB scoring by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. And you can find all of those numbers for every team on draftsharks.com. Toughest on wide receiver scoring in the league, 5th toughest on running backs, 9th toughest on tight ends. So, there's not a spot that this is a good matchup for in terms of the Jacksonville offense.
Yeah, I would try not to use Trevor Lawrence. He's, come through for you if you used him the past 2 weeks, but he has 3 rushing scores over the last 2 weeks. So it's been kind of fluky. And like you said, really tough matchup here. Denver to me is potentially the best pass defense in the NFL. So we try not to use Lawrence. I do think Christian Kirk is fine to stick with. He has played just 32% of his snaps on the outside the season. So he's going to avoid Pat Surtain, who, has emerged as, one of the best corners in the NFL. So I think Kirk, like he's been most of the season, should be the focal point of this Jags passing offense on Sunday morning. He should be in for enough volume to have a nice fantasy day.
Mm-hmm. I'd still have him somewhere around wide receiver 25, though, as opposed to looking for a truly big week.
That's fair. I think he's a bit higher than that in our PPR rankings.
And then, like I said, it's not a great spot for anybody else. Travis Etienne's going to lead the backfield. He's going to be starting for you going forward. And JaMychal Hasty is the new number 2. Doug Peterson says he'll get more carries now that James Robinson's gone. Certainly wouldn't want to be in position to use him, but JaMychal Hasty is at least stashable at this point as the handcuff to Travis Etienne, if nothing else.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see exactly how much more work Etienne gets with Robinson out of the way now. Like if the Jags are really going to make him a workhorse, if they're going to kind of keep him in that 15 to 20 touch range. I think worst case, he's like a high-end RB2 the rest of the way, and he has the potential to be an RB1. As far as the handcuff goes, like I know Peterson talked to JaMychal Hasty. I do think Snoop Conner, though, might be worth stashing in deeper leagues too. Hasty's an undersized change of pace guy. I'm not exactly sure what the backfield would look like if Etienne goes down. It probably wouldn't be a great fantasy situation, but I do think Connor, is a better replacement for James Robinson if the Jags are looking for that.
I certainly wouldn't go out of my way for either guy as a handcuff in this offense, but yeah.
That's fair. Yep.
Arizona at Minnesota to start the Sunday 1:00 Eastern time slate. Vikings by 2.5 in this one, down 1 point from previous, which I'm not sure if that's fair. Over under 49 points in this one. Cardinals just 13th though in implied team total on the week right now, behind the Falcons, Bucks, Seahawks, and Lions, among others. Jared, what do you think of them this week?
I thought like eye test wise, they looked better with Hopkins back last week. Like the offensive production wasn't big because Andy Dalton threw the 2 pick sixes and that game was kind of over by halftime. But I did think Kyler had one of his better games of the season passing. He actually got his second best PFF passing grade last week. It was 6th among quarterbacks league wide. And this Minnesota pass defense is beatable. They're 21st in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA. They haven't given up a ton of fantasy production to quarterbacks because they've allowed just 6 passing touchdowns, but they've allowed 8.4 yards per attempt. So I think, I'm still not super excited about Kyler. I don't think he has like the massive ceiling, but I do think he's a, solid quarterback 1 in this matchup and with the rushing ability.
Yeah, he came out 5th in our rankings, and every time I see that this season, I'm like, Kyler's got to go down there. I look behind him, and it's like, I guess he doesn't have to this week because it's not a great week for QBs. He's number 2 among quarterbacks in underdog main slate ADP for the week right now, right behind Jalen Hurts. And main slate is worth noting, of course, because Josh Allen, Joe Burrow are not on that main slate. And that matches where we have Kyler Murray in our rankings right now. He certainly could have that kind of week. It also wouldn't surprise me if Kyler is outscored by guys like Kirk Cousins, Tua, Geno Smith this week. So those guys are all kind of jumbled together. And, my honest answer to anyone who then asks the question of should I play Kyler Murray or Kirk Cousins this week, it's like it could really go either way between them. I'm personally probably going to play Kirk Cousins because I think he's a safer bet and doesn't give away ceiling versus Kyler Murray. But Kyler Murray could run for 100 yards in this one and have 1 touchdown and easily outscore Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, it's close. I like both sides of this game. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, definitely a game that we'll talk about on tomorrow's DFS shows.
DeAndre Hopkins, a must use after the high usage of his return last week. And, fingers crossed that we get some combo of Robbie Anderson or AJ Green running opposite DeAndre Hopkins so that we can get Rondale Moore back in the slot. And that's why even when the offense looks better, I still want to bet against it, because running Rondale Moore all game on the outside is just stupid.
Yeah, but at the same time, playing AJ Green is stupid too. So like there's not a great option. There wasn't a great option for them last week with Robbie Anderson not ready to go. Yeah, we'll see. That's what we want for Rondale Moore. I mean, I would like to see it first before trusting him in fantasy lineup again. 84% of his snaps out wide last week, caught just one pass. His 2 quality fantasy games have come when he's been primarily in the slot, and he's had 2 bad fantasy games when he's been primarily on the outside. So it's kind of simple what we need. But I'm not sure Robbie Anderson's going to be ready for full workload yet. So again, I try to play wait and see game with Rondale this week.
That's the thing. I can get not running AJ Green out there, but if you are going to run Rondale Moore out there and you only target him twice while you're targeting DeAndre Hopkins 12 times in his first game back, and it's not like you're peppering Greg Dortch with targets inside. It's just like you're saying, I don't need Rondale Moore to be involved in this game. And if that's the thought, then I guess the message is Rondale Moore is not as good as anybody wants him to be. So I don't know. We'll see where this goes. I continue to distrust Cliff Kingsbury. I think he is hurting everybody's fantasy value there, but at least there's talent. At least the matchup is positive this week. Backfield, we'll see who's the lead back. James Conner limited in practice Wednesday, so that's an upgrade versus the past 2 weeks. No practice at all last week before he sat out that Thursday night game. No practice the week before he missed that game. Before that, 18 opportunities in each of his previous 2 contests, each of the previous 2 that he did not leave early with injury, of course. The Vikings are weak versus both the pass and the run, and the Cardinals would prefer to run, it looks like. If you look at our pass rate versus expected article, it's a free read on draftsharks.com, comes to us from Timmy Hernandez. If you look at that, the Cardinals pass under expected for the season, and over the past 4 weeks, it's even been further under their full season number.
Yeah, and I don't know what the backfoot's going to look like. It looks like Darrell Williams has a chance to return this week too. My guess is Connor steps back in as the lead guy, but that Benjamin might have earned himself a bigger role, which would make this a tough situation to rely on for fantasy. So ideally, you can avoid everyone in this backfield, but if you're picking, I do think Connor's your best bet, assuming he plays.
Yeah, and we'll obviously watch for indications as we head into the weekend. On the Vikings side, I'm watching what will happen with the running back routes coming out of the bye. Both Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison should be healthier. They were both dealing with shoulder injuries previously. Neither of them listed on Wednesday's injury report. We saw Madison's route rate dip significantly the last time out. He had taken some of those from Dalvin Cook following Cook's shoulder injury. Of course, Mattison was the one with the shoulder issue last time, but Dalvin Cook still stayed short of 50% in that category.
Yeah, Madison played just 13% of the Vikings offensive snaps last time out. So I definitely, and he was up around like 40% the game before that. So I think the shoulder was the main reason for that. So I do expect this to be, a closer split coming out of the bye week. And the routes are interesting this week, especially because Arizona is dead last in Football Outsiders running back coverage rankings. They're actually pretty solid against the run. So it's not a great rushing matchup for these guys, but they're susceptible to the running backs in the passing game. It's a good matchup for Minnesota's passing game in general. Arizona 27th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA, and they're second in pass rate over expected against. Teams are throwing against Arizona. The Vikings 6th in pass rate over expected for, so they've already been a pass leaning offense. So I expect this to be a pretty pass happy game plan from the Vikings.
Yeah, and it's nice to not have Mike Zimmer involved in this, so we're not going to get a Vikings offense that just is determined to run no matter what the matchup says. We could very well get 40-plus Kirk Cousins pass attempts in this one, even if the Vikings control the game.
For sure, and I think that makes Adam Thielen a pretty attractive wide receiver 3 this week. He's seen 7+ targets in 5 straight games now. And then I do think Irv Smith is in play as well with, hopefully elevated passing volume from Minnesota. And the Cardinals are 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends.
Yeah, I would have Irv Smith over guys like Hunter Henry, Juwan Johnson, and or probably over Greg Dulcich and Kate Otten as well.
Yes, we have him ranked ahead of all those guys. I think, he's probably your best streaming option. In shallower leagues, he might be available. I think Irv Smith is probably your best bet this week.
Yeah, I think Irv Smith and Mike Gesicki are pretty close based on what we've seen from them the past couple of weeks. It's the same kind of situation, really. It's neither is a guy that we can count on being out there for every pass route, and they're both athletic enough in potentially high scoring enough offenses to deliver.
Yeah, I'm with you on Gesicki. We'll get to him next year. I'm just surprised to hear you say something nice about him.
Hey, I got to be open. All I'm saying is he could be on the field. 7 targets in 2 straight games, too. You're going to get to that. Actually, that game's next. Yep. So let's go ahead and transition into that one. Miami at Detroit. Dolphins by 3.5, over under 51.5. So it should be plenty of points in this one. The Dolphins, second highest team total for the week, just 1.5 behind Buffalo as of right now. So, I mean, you're playing everyone here, and that does include Mike Gesicki. And as I said, 7 targets in 2 straight games. They won last week. His snap share stayed up against Pittsburgh. So I think he's a good option this week.
Right. The increase in targets has, coincided with an increase in pass routes for Gesicki, which makes it easier to trust. He's ran a route on 71% of pass plays over the past 3 weeks. That was at 52% over the first 4 games. So I'm not exactly sure why it's happened, but his role in the passing game has climbed over the past 3 weeks. And the Lions are 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends and 31st in Football Outsiders tight end coverage ranking. So it's a good matchup, good game environment. He could bone you. I wouldn't be shocked if, he kind of disappears all of a sudden, but everything on paper sets up for a pretty nice Gesicki game here.
It coincided with a dip in playing time for Cedric Wilson. So maybe it's a matter of not getting what they thought they were getting from Cedric Wilson, who I guess has been dealing with an injury, although I don't know if it cost him like 1 game so far, I think.
Yeah. I mean, Trent Sherfield's kind of emerges their third wideout. Yeah, I mean, again, Gesicki, and Gesicki should be the third option in this passing game. Like, there's no reason he shouldn't be.
Yeah, maybe Mike McDaniel just caught up on tape. He didn't have time to get to all of it before the season. He was like, oh, he's a tight end. We'll have him block. Then he's like, oh, wait a second. He's not a tight end. He's just a tall, semi-thick receiver. Let's actually throw him passes.
Checks out. That makes sense.
Jalen Waddle limited Wednesday with a shoulder issue. Doesn't seem like anything we need to worry about. It's just because Jalen Waddle weighs 150 pounds. He's going to be limited a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you're starting both the wideouts. I think Raheem Mostert is a strong fantasy play here too. Good matchup, obviously. Mostert's played 62+% of Miami's offensive snaps in 4 straight games now. He's averaging 15.8 carries and 3.3 targets per game over that stretch. The Lions are dead last in adjusted points allowed to running backs.
And in addition to a good matchup this week, he and the Dolphins have the best rushing schedule the rest of the way. If you look at our strength of schedule page. So I would be trying to get Raheem Mostert this week if you're looking for some running back help. It's also probably a reason to stash Chase Edmonds if you have a spot to play with and you're looking for kind of the, upside handcuff stash. Chase Edmonds is not usable in lineups right now, but if Raheem Mostert goes down, he's the number 1 running back for the Dolphins.
And Raheem Mostert tends to go down. So yeah, I agree. Edmonds is a nice stash.
On the other side of this one, the Lions, of course, have some injuries to sort through. TJ Hawkinson, no practice Wednesday because of a knee issue. That's how TJ Hawkinson is going to spend most of his Wednesdays. Amon-Ra St. Brown, limited Wednesday. Dan Campbell said he did not actually suffer a concussion in that game that he left early last week, so he should be cleared to play. We'll see exactly what develops on that front. Josh Reynolds, no practice Wednesday. His absence could be good for Khalif Raymond. And then Jameson Williams out at least another month, so don't bother with him on most redraft rosters. And finally, let's end the injury stuff on some good news. DeAndre Swift, full practice Wednesday, so he might actually play football again this week.
Yes, it looks like Swift will be back, so he should be back in fantasy lineups. We'll see exactly how big a workload he gets coming off those injuries, but he's a starter for you. The St. Brown thing, this is going to be a thing going forward, and there's nothing you can really do about it, but we're going to lose a lot more players to this new protocol going forward. But like you said, Dan Campbell said St. Brown was not actually diagnosed with a concussion, so he should be trending towards being available for this game. And I expect Hawkinson to play too. He's been held out of Wednesday practices a few times this season, and then seems to be good to go come Sunday.
And I mean, it's going to piss people off when guys leave games for concussions and don't actually end up being diagnosed with a concussion, but you're going to have to get over it because it's a whole lot better for them as people to pull them and not have it be a concussion than to leave them in the game and then have them leave the next one on a stretcher. So don't complain out loud about it. Just kind of suck it up. If we get DeAndre Swift back for this game, it's going to be tough to play Jamal Williams. Obviously still somewhat in play for those who are reaching down for a running back option, but this isn't a great matchup for the Russian.
Yeah, he'd be a TD dependent fantasy play. And like you said, Miami's been good against the run this season. This is an interesting matchup because you have a Lions team that, wants to be a run first offense, but Miami has been much weaker against the pass than the run this season. And teams have been going pass heavy against Miami. So I'll be curious to see exactly what Detroit's game plan looks like. If Miami jumps ahead, it's probably not going to matter anyways, which I definitely think is possible. So I think it's a good spot for the Lions passing game. Hawkinson especially. Miami's been really bad against tight end. So as long as that injury is not a factor, I think Hawkinson's a strong season-long play and a strong DFS play this week.
Yeah, we had somebody ask on YouTube toward the beginning of this show if they should go ahead and play Bateman in the flex with TJ Hawkinson as one of the other options. For me, Jared, I'm waiting to see if Hawkinson practices today. I haven't seen that report. If he seems like he's going to be good to go, I think that I would go ahead and wait for Hawkinson because I think there's probably a higher ceiling on him this week than Bateman. What do you think between those two?
Yeah, we have Hawkinson projected for more fantasy points straight up. So it always feels a bit strange to play a tight end in the flex, but I think in that particular case, it makes sense.
And I do like Jared Goff this week. Like as much as it's possible to like Jared Goff, if you're looking for a quarterback, I would play Jared Goff ahead of Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, again, it's a good spot if the Lions fall behind and are forced to throw it a bit more than they probably want to. And, Goff has not had his weapons now for a while, right? Swift's been out. St. Brown has not played a full game since week 3, I want to say. So, I mean, and Goff was great early on fantasy-wise. I do think there's some bounce-back potential for him this week.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from that game?
Nope.
Chicago at Dallas, Cowboys by 9.5, over under 42.5. Justin Fields was better on Monday night, but I think more importantly, the scheme looked much better. That included 7 designed runs for Justin Fields. He had 4 total of those over the previous 4 games. So it's not yet time to call Justin Fields a fantasy starter, especially in this week's matchup against Dallas, but definitely a very encouraging game all around.
Yeah, that's 3 straight top 12 fantasy finishes for Justin Fields. Now, I would not trust him in this matchup. I hate this matchup for him. That Bears O-line against this Cowboys pass rush is going to be a serious problem. I mean, we'll see what Fields can do rushing, but I don't think he's going to get a whole lot done passing this week. That said, I have Lamar Jackson on quite a few season-long teams. Jackson has a week 10 bye. Fields gets the Lions in week 10. So I went ahead and added Justin Fields to a lot of my Lamar Jackson teams, and we'll just, stash him for the next couple of weeks and use him for that week 10 bye for Jackson.
Yeah. I have Justin Fields stashed on a Lamar Jackson team as well, so I like that. Byron Pringle did get designated to return from IR, so we'll see what that does to the pass-catching crew. I still don't think there's anybody you want to start from that group, so it doesn't matter a whole lot, but it doesn't hurt the quarterback to get somebody else back in that area. Khalil Herbert's usage was way up against New England with David Montgomery down a bit in that game.
Yeah, the snaps were 56% for Montgomery to 41% for Herbert. That was a season low for Montgomery in his healthy games, a season high for Justin Herbert. Herbert even started the second half of that game, which is something we haven't seen before. And Matt Eberflus came out and said earlier this week that they're going to continue with the committee. He didn't say exactly what the split's going to look like, but I would think it's going to look similar to what we saw last week. And that's tough for fantasy, in this lower scoring offense. It's a run heavy offense. So there's decent amount of carries to go around, but if they're splitting, I think it leaves both guys as RB3s at best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that, especially given the offense. We got a good one Monday night, but we haven't gotten much from them so far. Yeah. So it hasn't been an offense that you want to bet on. On the Dallas side, don't be surprised if they continue to lean run this soon after Dak Prescott's return from the thumb injury. Not only is it good for, the possibility of Dak's thumb getting healthier and stronger and whatever, it's also good for the offense if Dak Prescott is anywhere short of usual Dak Prescott. And he still was short of usual Dak Prescott last week.
Yeah, last week Dallas finished at 0% pass rate over expected, meaning they passed at exactly the rate we'd expect them to based on the game script and situations they faced. Now, as we've said all year, Chicago dead last in pass rate over expected against. Teams go run heavy against Chicago. I would expect that to be the case for the Cowboys this week as big home favorites, and that could make Tony Pollard a top 5 fantasy play this week if Zeke Elliott sits with this knee injury.
We got some breaking news during the show here, Jared, because Kadarius Toney has been traded to the Chiefs for 3rd and 6th round draft picks. Kadarius Toney, I'm not sure if his hamstrings were included in this deal, but Kadarius Toney is going to be a Chief going forward.
I mean, that's best case scenario, right? I mean, as you said, the Chiefs wideouts have been disappointing. Yeah, we'll see if he can get healthy. That's super exciting. Glad I've kept Tony stashed on all these rosters.
I think it's also a good time for potentially trading Kadarius Toney to people who get excited about anybody who gets added to the Chiefs, even though he's probably not going to pass Juju or MVS this year, and we'll see about him versus Sky Moore.
Yeah, I think he could. I mean, I don't know. It's Tony's best in the slot. Though I don't know how it will work exactly. I think he could be the second most productive receiver on that team the rest of the way, if his hamstrings allow it. I wouldn't be selling him in Dynasty. I could see the case for selling him in redraft, just with the hamstring stuff, having to learn a brand new offense now. But I'm excited. That's
I think the short history makes a sell case for him anywhere, but I wouldn't just unload him for the sake of unloading him. It would be a price check thing where if I think somebody is more excited than they should be, given the floor that still exists, then it's time to sell. And otherwise I'm happy to hold. But yeah, I think as far as him going somewhere, maybe Green Bay would be better than Kansas City, but it's tough to think of better situations to go into.
Third and a sixth round pick isn't nothing either. I mean, I know he was a first rounder just a year ago, but it's not like the Chiefs got him for nothing.
Yeah, it was a compensatory pick in the third round that they sent in that trade. So I'm sure that made it a little bit easier to give it up, but you're right. It's not nothing to give up a third round pick. Sixth rounder is kind of nothing, but anyway, back to the Dallas side of this one. We'll have more time to dig into that stuff. You hit on the backfield. Obviously, Tony Pollard, huge if Zeke Elliott misses this game. He has missed 2 practices this week with that knee. And Tony Pollard playable even if Zeke Elliott's active for that game. Dalton Schultz also tweaked that knee again last game, re-entered the game, though, limited practice Wednesday. So it doesn't seem like it'll affect his status for this game.
Yeah, ended up running a route on just 55% of pass plays last week. He's just not healthy. And again, I don't expect big passing volume from Dallas in this game. So I think you can do better than Dalton Schultz speaking. I'd use like Irv Smith over Dalton Schultz. I'd use Mike Gesicki over Dalton Schultz this week.
Those are close. I mean, I think they're in coin flip territory, really. Anything else from that game?
Nope.
Las Vegas at New Orleans, Raiders by 1.5, over under 49.5. On the Vegas side, we had limited Wednesday practices for Mac Hollins, for Darren Waller, for Hunter Renfrow, for Derek Carr, for Josh Jacobs. I say we don't worry about Jacobs. We don't worry too much about Carr unless you've heard otherwise. Renfrow played through it last week. Mac Hollins played through it last week. The limited practice for Darren Waller is a positive because he was out last week with that hamstring injury.
Yeah, so it looks like Waller has a chance to be back, and you're probably starting him if you have him. He's been disappointing this season. The Saints are really tough against tight ends too. They're second in adjusted fantasy points allowed, and Football Outsiders has them first in tight end coverage. So Waller would not be like an elite fantasy play if he's back, but again, he'd land inside the top 8 in our rankings this week. We'll see what he does over these next couple of days of practice.
Devontae Adams also no practice Wednesday because of an illness. Like we always say, the illnesses tend to clear up by the weekend, but we'll watch to make sure that he's going to play. Also, safety Jonathan Abrams, if you're an IDP player, out Wednesday with an illness, so we'll watch him as well. The healthy pass catchers will be very usable in this matchup. A full power New Orleans defense is solid, might be one that you adjust matchups for, but they're still well short of full power, and especially Marshawn Lattimore. No practice Wednesday still, missed the past 2 games with an abdominal injury, no lock to be back for this one. They did get Paulson Adebo back to practice on Wednesday on a limited basis, so we'll see about him, but they lost fill-in Bradley Roby to IR. PJ Williams, another fill-in guy, has been on IR already, so this is a defense that's dealing with a lot of injuries among those cover guys, making this a better spot for the Raiders passing game.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great spot for Devontae Adams. Renfrow, I'd rather not use Renfrow. I mean, like you said, he's dealing with the injury. His route rates have been in like the low 70s, 73 and 72% in his 2 games back from injury. He's not playing in 3 wide receiver sets, which is hurting him a bit. And the Raiders, with Josh Jacobs playing like a Hall of Famer, they've gone run heavy over the past 3 weeks. They're minus 5% in pass rate over expectation. And the Saints haven't been great against the run this season either. So I think the Raiders probably will continue to lean on Jacobs in the run game here.
And you meant Renfro's not playing in 2 wide receiver sets, right? Where he's leaving the field in favor of Mac Hollins.
Correct. Yep.
Andy Dalton will start again on the other side, despite Jameis Winston putting in a full practice Wednesday. Have you seen any more about why that is? Why they've already named Dalton?
Yeah, Dennis Allen said yesterday that, Dalton's the guy going forward. He said it's, performance based, that Winston's healthy enough to play. They're going with Andy Dalton. I don't know if Dennis Allen watched that Thursday night loss to Arizona because Dalton was not that good. I know the fantasy numbers were there, but we'll see. I would still expect Winston to get back in there at some point this season. But it's Dalton for now. I think that's good news, especially for Alvin Kamara. We talked about the Saints have gone super run heavy with Dalton under center the past few weeks. Kamara seeing a ton of targets from Andy Dalton, so it's good news for him. And Chris Olave's been great too, just because he's getting so many targets, such a big percent of the target share. Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry still sidelined on Wednesday. Looks like they're going to miss another game.
It's amazing news, most importantly, for my Superflex entries on Underdog from this summer, because I had him like 50% in that Superflex puppy. So yeah, we'll see where that goes. And to be fair to Dalton in that game, the 2 pick sixes on consecutive drives stand out. First one went through Marquez Callaway's hands and to a guy on the other team. But the other interception that Dalton threw in that game was just a bad decision into the end zone. So I agree. If you watch that whole game, if you're saying that it's performance based, you have to say, yeah, Andy wasn't great last week, but overall he's been pretty good for us.
Yeah, and he's maybe been better than Jameis Winston has been. So we'll see. We'll see where that goes. I mean, it's a good matchup here for the passing game. The Raiders are 30th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA. They're actually 31st in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. So I think you can do better than Dalton in your 1 quarterback leagues, but he's a nice QB2 play this week.
And he is going to be in play for those. If you're in one of those leagues where your league mates love scooping quarterbacks and not leaving anybody available, he's 16th in our rankings. So certainly in play. He's ahead of Russell Wilson, ahead of Matthew Stafford, among other guys. I wouldn't be surprised if Dalton outscores guys like Jimmy G, Trevor Lawrence, even Dak Prescott this week. We'll see exactly who he's going to be throwing passes to besides Alvin Kamara, though, because Adam Troutman didn't practice, Jarvis Landry didn't practice, Michael Thomas didn't practice Wednesday. So we'll see who's available among those guys. Obviously, Chris Olave is going to be out there prominently.
Yeah, Chris Olave, 30% of the Saints targets over his last 4 full games, so he's locked in. Again, Alvin Kamara has seen 7.8 targets per game over his last 4. And I do think Juwan Johnson is in play as a tight end streamer this week. Saw just 5 targets last week for a 10% target share. He had a 79% route rate, so that's a mark that we like. Then you have Vegas, who's 22nd in adjusted points allowed to tight end. So good matchup for Juwan Johnson. Again, I'd rather play like an Irv Smith or a Mike Gesicki, but Johnson's kind of the next guy up as a spot starter this week.
Yeah, I agree. Carolina at Atlanta, Falcons by 4.5. It's opened at Falcons by 6.5. So it's down 2, I guess, after Carolina finally showed that they're alive. Over under 41.5. It's the first time this year that Atlanta has been favored. Not shocking. PJ Walker, DJ Moore, run game, all fared surprisingly well against the Bucs last week, but just make sure you don't get carried away with any of them this time around. Good matchups for all against the Falcons, but they are still limited entities.
PJ Walker led all quarterbacks in PFF passing grade last week. I watched most of that game. He played well. I don't know if he was the best quarterback in the NFL, but that's what the PFF grades say. Yeah, I mean, you're not starting PJ Walker, but like you said, it is a great matchup. Atlanta's dead last in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA, and they're down their top 2 cornerbacks for this game, AJ Terrell and Casey Hayward. So that makes DJ Moore at least a comfortable wide receiver 3. And I would not be surprised if he finishes the week as like a top 25 wide receiver.
I'm going to be watching the PJ Walker line for Underdog Pick'ems this week. I posted my weekly top plays for Underdog Pick'ems, which, by the way, have fared pretty well on the season, 92 and 56, based on the Draft Sharks projections every week. Walker's number almost immediately came up, from when I grabbed the numbers in the morning to when I posted it around noon. His yardage line was already up 7 yards. It looks like it's down 1 yard as of right now. So 181.5. If you like what PJ Walker did last week and you want to kind of bet on him, but not trust your team to him, play him in an Underdog Pick'em. It's a good spot to do it because all you need him to do is reach 190 yards against the Falcons and you're sitting pretty.
Yeah, you might need DJ Moore to get like 100 of those yards because I'm not sure who else he's going to throw to, but I like the over there.
Yeah, we joked about DJ Moore's target share last week, and it was even higher than the 40% that I was joking. It was like 45% in the first game.
Yeah, 45%. And Jacob Gibbs of CBS, who's a great Twitter follow. He had some awesome numbers of DJ Moore just being better with PJ Walker than he's been with Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield, both in terms of volume and in terms of efficiency. So it's not saying a whole lot when you're comparing someone to Darnold and Mayfield, but Walker has been better for Moore's fantasy production than those other two guys.
Mm-hmm. Chuba Hubbard, no practice Wednesday because of that ankle that apparently he could have come back in and played on in that game, or so the team said. So we'll watch and see how that goes. I would have liked to see him at least be limited Wednesday to trust that ankle is okay.
Yeah, me too. And Hubbard was leading that backfield before he went down. He had played 55% of the snaps. He had 9 carries and 3 targets versus Dante Foreman's 6 carries and 2 targets. So Hubbard looks like the guy we'd rather play when he's healthy, but yeah, we'll see about the ankle. Then if Hubbard's out, Foreman's going to get most of the work, and that would make him a decent fantasy play. Though I still think what we got from the Panthers offense last week might be the best game we get from them for the rest of the season. So I'm not going to go overrating this offense based on that last week.
Yeah, I would bet that we got the best offensive game from the Panthers that we will get all season. Doesn't mean that they won't put up numbers. Just don't think, they solved their issues. Now they're going to help us the rest of the way. So They're playable, but not, don't go overboard. On the Falcons side, they have guys that can play, but their offensive approach is keeping everyone from actually reaching their full fantasy potential. Say what you want about it making sense for Arthur Smith's situation, but they attempted 13 passes last week in a game that they lost by 18, and the Bengals scored their last touchdown of the game with 5:20 left in the third quarter. So at that point, you should just be throwing a lot, at least, if not all the time, to try to catch up, and that's not what they're doing. So if they're doing that, plus spreading the backfield opportunities around, it just makes everybody you can use them at some level, but nobody a target play.
Yeah, we knew that Atlanta wanted to run it as much as possible when game script was going okay for them, but to see them continue to go super run heavy down 21 zip, there's no situation going forward where we can expect them to throw enough to support Drake London or Kyle Pitts. London, I think you just have to bench at this point. He is 80th among wide receivers in half PPR points over the last 5 weeks. He's just not getting enough volume. Kyle Pitts is 20th among tight ends in half PPR points over the last 5 weeks. He's at least 13th in expected half PPR points. So he's getting enough work to be a borderline fantasy option. He actually got unlucky last week. He caught a ball the 1-inch line, didn't quite get it over the goal line. Even might have got it over the goal line, but they couldn't overturn it on review. So, Pitts is borderline, but even his usage is not even quite at tight end 1 level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm out on both of them for being trustworthy fantasy entities this year. We'll see if Desmond Ridder makes it in, if that changes anything. But if this is what they want to do with the offense and how they think they can stay competitive, then fine for the Falcons. It's definitely not fine for fantasy outlooks. I want to leave the Falcons at saying that Cordero Patterson is eligible to return after this game for a week 9 meeting with the Chargers. So he's somebody that's worth trying to get this week, I think.
Definitely, yeah. I think when he's healthy, he's going to step back in as the lead runner in this, super run heavy offense.
Nothing else from this game, right?
Nope.
New England at the Jets, Patriots by 2.5, over under 40.5. Mac Jones is apparently going to start again. Superman is going to sit on the bench because he came in last week, drove the team to a couple of scores, then he lost 3 turnovers. We did at least learn that Bailey Zappi is named after a character from Party of Five and that he knows the words to Stacy's mom. So it was a positive overall, I think.
Yeah, Party of Five's before my time, I think. I've never seen that show, but I couldn't believe Patriots fans calling for Bailey Zappi when you just got a great rookie year out of Mac Jones. But whatever. I think in this passing game, it's just Jacoby Myers is a wide receiver 3. He will avoid Sauce Gardner for most of this game playing in the slots. Myers is going to have the better matchup versus the Patriots outside corner, so he should be a decent target bet here. Should be another run heavy game plan from New England. Ramondre Stevenson easily outsnapped Damian Harris last week. I think that was at least partly due to the game script and Harris, his first game off the hamstring. I don't think the split's going to be that big going forward, but I do think Stevenson at this point, has to clearly be the top fantasy play in this backfield. I think Harris is kind of looking like a touchdown or bust RB3 at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly betting that Stevenson plays more and produces more going forward. I do think that the gap is going to be a lot closer going forward than it was for that game, which just had it had surprising game flow throughout. The Bears dominated time of possession, so the Patriots didn't get on the field much. They were trailing a lot more for a longer and by a lot more points than anybody would have guessed in that game. So you just hit reset on the backfield, play Stevenson first, and we'll see if Damian Harris is still going to help us. Hunter Henry also backslid in that game, with the Patriots in general, but I think he got back into, I would rather not use Hunter Henry territory than maybe we could use Hunter Henry.
Yeah, he still ran her out on 78% of the pass plays, but, it's just, this is not a game where New England's going to have to throw it more than they want to. So I just think there's going to be enough volume to support Henry as you have more than a touchdown or bust guy.
Although we'll see, we would have said the same thing about the Patriots heading into Monday night's game against Chicago. So against these upstart Jets, maybe they do fall behind and have to throw the ball.
Yep, possible.
Speaking of those Jets, on that side, Corey Davis did not practice Wednesday with a knee issue. I mean, if he's out, it would obviously potentially help opportunities for the other receivers, but we need a whole lot more from this passing game before we're actually using that catapult somebody into strong starter consideration.
Yeah, Jets continue to go run heavy with Zach Wilson under center. New England has been good against the pass this season. They're 10th against wide receivers. So there's no part of this passing game that I would want to use this week.
James Robinson was not listed on the initial injury report with the Jets this week. There was some mention of knee soreness in the wake of that game in Jacksonville last weekend. It was probably, well, I shouldn't say probably. It might have also been to do with the Jags knowing they were going to trade him and making sure that he didn't get hurt on the verge of such a trade. Either way, it seems like James Robinson will be healthy enough for this game. I'd be playing Michael Carter first, though, Jared, because even with Breece Hall, who they obviously loved in the draft, as the stud in tow to open the season, they had Michael Carter leading the backfield. So I don't see why the Jets would be opposed to having Michael Carter lead the backfield with James Robinson around.
Yeah, I think Carter is going to be the better fantasy option for the rest of the season, and I would definitely rather play him this week. I'd be surprised if Robinson's ready for like a full workload, whatever the Jets envision his full workload being. I don't think he's going to get that this week. And we did get 8 games of a healthy Michael Carter as Jets lead back last season. He averaged 12.3 carries and 5.4 targets per game in those 8 games. I don't think he's going to get to that target number, but I think, 12 or so carries is about what we should expect. Like the Jets are not going to overload him. But if he gets, 12 or so carries per game and gets, at least a few targets, like he can be a decent fantasy play. Tough to get excited about the upside. The Jets also just lost Elijah Vera Tucker, who was their best run blocker on the O-line. He's gone for the season, so that's not going to help this running game going forward.
Not going well for anybody named Elijah for that team right now. Maybe if we get Mike White back on the field at some point, we can get 10 or 12 targets for Michael Carter, but we'll see otherwise.
It is a good matchup for Carter. The Patriots are 28th in Football Outsiders run defense, DVOA.
Yeah, although if they're going to do their Patriots take away your best thing in this game, it's probably Michael Carter, because I'm not sure if the Jets know how to do anything else besides run right now.
Yeah, you might be right.
Pittsburgh at Philly, Eagles by 10.5, over under 43.5 for this game. On the Pittsburgh side, Pat Freiermuth limited Wednesday with his ankle issue. We'll watch how the week goes for him, but really he's probably the most attractive Steeler for this game relative to everybody's positions.
Yeah, Fryer has a 22.5% target share in his 5 healthy games this season. He's 5th in half PPR points per game among tight ends in those 5 games. So, and Philly's been just decent against tight ends. They're 19th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. They've been tougher against wide receivers this season. So I do think Freiermuth is a pretty solid top 10 fantasy play this week and for the rest of the season.
Yeah, and given the pass rush for Philly in this one, and Freiermuth working shorter than the wide receivers, it just makes sense for Freiermuth to be targeted in this game. I wouldn't go out of my way to start a Steelers receiver. They will probably fall behind and have to throw the ball. So, I mean, there are guys that make sense at some level in PPR, but I'm not projecting a big game for anybody.
Yeah, I think Deontay Johnson and George Pickens are okay wide receiver 3s. Deontay Johnson over the last 4 weeks, he's 14th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points. He's 65th in actual fantasy points. So like that has to swing back in his direction at some point.
Yeah,
maybe at least a little bit. at least a little bit. George Pickens, by the way, he's 30th in expected points, 24th in actual fantasy points. Guy's just a stud. Like it's a tough matchup for him. So he's lower in our rankings than he will be for most of the season. But like it's fun starting George Pickens. I had Pickens going against Najee Harris in main event last Sunday night. I needed Pickens to outscore Harris, and he delivered. That was fun.
This might be the most distracting preview pod I've ever had with all the stuff about the Kadarius Toney trade now and people wondering if Kareem Hunt's going to get traded. No news on that, by the way. I don't mean to suggest that, but obviously when you get one big name trade, everybody's like, well, what about this guy? Is he about to move as well? So I'll try to refocus. Eagles side, honestly, there's really not a whole lot to discuss because we're just happy to have the Eagles back, and everybody that you've been using makes sense in this matchup.
Yeah, exactly. I don't really have anything. Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders, the two wideouts in Dallas Goedert, all nice fantasy plays. Nothing to worry about with the matchup here.
Sweet. Tennessee at Houston to start the late afternoon slate in the East. Titans by 2.5 in this one, as little as 1.5 in some places on WinBet at least. I made that bet just before the show. Over under a 40.5. The question, I think, for Tennessee here is Ryan Tannehill, who did not practice Wednesday with the ankle sprain that temporarily knocked him out of last week's game, though. He did return, so I would guess that he'll be ready to play, but it wouldn't be the first time that a guy came back to play and then was not able to play the next week. I'm just not sure. Really, they just need their quarterback to be somebody who can take a snap, turn around, and hand it to Derrick Henry, so yes. I don't know how much it matters.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, you can't pick a better spot for Derrick Henry. I by the way, bet Tennessee's team total over 20.5 points. I thought that was, I think Henry might get that by himself. This is the same spot we talked about for Josh Jacobs last week that had, Jacobs sitting first in our running back rankings last week. Henry is first in our running back rankings this week. The Texans are 28th in pass rate over expected against. So teams are going run heavy against them. 32nd in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA. 32nd in Pro Football Focus run defense grades. 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running back. So it should be a smash game for Derrick Henry, who is still, by the way, also seeing decent volume in the passing game. 4 targets per game over the last 4 on a 17% target share. So in case you needed another reason to like him this week, he's still doing a bit more than usual in the passing game.
Yeah, that's been the truly positive development for him this year. And then on the Houston side, it's just pretty straightforward at this point. Dameon Pierce has gotten 20-plus carries in 3 of the past 4 games, even though his team has lost 2 of those games in which he got the 20 carries. And in the game where he didn't get to 20 carries, he took his 14 for 131 yards. So he's somebody that you're starting unless you're in awesome shape at running back or flex spots in general.
Yeah, and if you look at last week's box score, you'll see Dare Ogunbowale with 8 total opportunities. Those all came on the final possession. It was just Davis Mills checking down to Dare, checking all the way down the field. So that's what happened there. So don't worry about that for Dameon Pierce. He's locked in as a fantasy starter. Brandon Cooks, his target share has been down since the start of the season. 29% target share over the first 2 games, just 19% over the last 4. But it looks like we're going to have no Nico Collins in this game, who has emerged as, the clear number 2 wide receiver in Houston. So that should get Cooks' target share back up, at least into like the mid 20s in this game. Nice matchup as well. The Titans are 29th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. So I think Cooks might be more of a wide receiver 3 going forward with a healthy Nico Collins, but I think he's a nice wide receiver 2 play this week.
I know nice wide receiver 2 might be a little generous for Brandon Cooks right now. We'll see. He's at least somebody that I can play at wide receiver 3 and hope that he's going to get target volume finally starts paying off.
Yeah, I like him. I think he's got a chance of 10 targets this week if Nico's out. And again, Tennessee's pass defense has not been good.
And the word on Nico Collins' groin injury is that it's not season ending. So when a coach says that's he's probably not going to be back soon.
Yes.
New York Giants at Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks by 3 in this one, over under 44.5. And Jared, what's the case for playing Daniel Jones this week?
The big thing is that he's 3rd among all quarterbacks in rushing fantasy points. He's averaging 7.5 fantasy points per game just rushing, behind only Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts. And this matchup's okay. Seattle has been better against the pass lately. That they've looked better with the eye test, and then Football Outsiders has them up to 19th in pass defense DVOA. They were in bottom 5 early on this season. So it's like a middling passing matchup for Daniel Jones. But again, I think, the passing production plus if he gives you another, 6, 7, 8 points with his legs, makes him a decent spot start option this week. Not excited about him, but I think he's okay if you have to go there.
Yeah, I'm not excited. I'm never excited about Daniel Jones. I was fine with him in the spot where we have him in our rankings, which is inside the top 10. I think at this point, though, I would not play Daniel Jones over Tom Brady tonight. I would not play him over Derek Carr, and I would probably not play him over Jared Goff. And the primary reason for me is that the Seahawks defense has been a lot better over the past 2 weeks versus both the run and the pass. The second best defense, according to DVOA, in all of week 6 against Arizona that week. Second best defense in overall DVOA for all teams in week 7 against the Chargers. So, it's not like they had a couple games against Houston and Tennessee and they stopped the pass. They've been really good the past couple weeks, and they've changed some things up. They altered who's on the field. They're playing more nickel and dime packages, relying on an area where they have better talent in the secondary than at linebacker. So the pass rush has also been better. They have 9 sacks over the past 2 games, 8 total sacks over the previous 5 games. So I'm not saying it's the defense to be scared of just yet, but I am saying with how they've trended over the past 2 weeks, I'm going to make sure that I don't overrate it as a positive matchup based on the previous games and pump Daniel Jones up too high. He's a starter for me, but not somebody that I'm playing over what I still think is a safer play in Tom Brady, Derek Carr.
Yeah, playing Jones over Brady doesn't feel good, so I wouldn't blame you there. I'd play Jones over Carr and Goff. I think it's still tough to recognize just how big rushing production is for quarterbacks. Like if you look at our projections, we only have Daniel Jones for 200 passing yards and 1.1 touchdowns. That's only a bit higher than he's averaged this season, but we have him for like 40 rushing yards and a third of a rushing touchdown. It really just boosts him up their rankings. So Brady over Jones, I'd be okay with, but I'd stick with him over Carr and Goff, just because again, with Carr especially, I just think it's going to be another run heavy game plan from Vegas.
Yeah. And then the other tough thing on rushing yardage, though, is he's got games of 68, 79, 107, and then every other game has been under 40. So, it's tough to average that out. He has just shown us that he's the kind of guy, if he does get an opening, he can have a good rushing day in one run, or we could get a defense that stifles him. So, we'll see. I'm good with him as a starter. It sounds like we're, splitting hairs with exactly where we would put him. The reason that's worth talking about is because otherwise it's Saquon Barkley and nobody else, especially now that Kadarius Toney's gone from this offense. It's been such a big part.
What about Wan'Dale?
Yeah, he's fine. It's like if you're in a position where you're like, who the heck am I going to play at wide receiver this week? Then Wan'Dale Robinson's a lighthouse. If you're like, oh, I really need somebody with upside this week, Wan'Dale Robinson's not that guy.
Yeah, he's a floor wide receiver 3 play in PPR, but he got up to the 81% route rate last week that we were looking to see after he was in the 30s in his return last week, or the 2 weeks before that. 27% target share for Wan'Dale last week, and we have no Daniel Bellinger now, who had emerged as a pretty key piece of this passing game. The Giants have nothing at tight end now, so that could push even more targets Wan'Dale's way. So again, he's not. I agree, he's not high upside. But I do think he's a good bet. He's like the Giants version of Rondale Moore, if we could count on Rondale to actually get targets.
On the Seattle side, DK Metcalf, no practice Wednesday because of that knee injury. He did take part in the walkthrough portion of the practice, and he had said coming out of last week's game that he thought he would be ready to practice Wednesday. So I think at this point, it's just a positive that there's even a possibility that DK Metcalf could play in week 8 after what seemed like it could be a potentially serious knee injury. We'll watch him throughout the week to see if he's going to play. It might be one of those situations where it'd be better if they don't play him, but we'll track that one. Then we also had Tyler Lockett limited in Wednesday's practice with a hamstring issue.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if Metcalf plays, but like you said, I think it's good long-term. Maybe he only misses a game or 2. Good to see Lockett put in a limited practice Wednesday after he didn't practice at all last week. So, that hamstring should be less of an issue this week. And if Metcalf's out, that's a big target boost for Tyler Lockett. So I think he's a strong fantasy play this week. It's going to be Marquise Goodwin, it looks like, as the number 2 wide receiver if DK Metcalf's out. Goodwin 2 touchdowns. That was Goodwin's second biggest fantasy game ever. He's been in the NFL for 9 seasons. That was the second biggest fantasy game ever. So that tells you not to overrate that. To me, Goodwin would be like a DFS only play. I think you could do better in season long.
Yeah, didn't he have another game where he had 2 catches and they were both 50+ yard touchdowns or something like that?
Hey, he's had a couple 100-yard games. I think he had one other 2 touchdown game. That was the only game in his career he scored more PPR points than he did last week.
That's what he brings to the table is he does have that big play speed. He's got world-class sprinter speed. Yeah. 4 catches, 126, 2 touchdowns was his biggest game back in 2018 for the 49ers. So, I mean, he is at least a speedy guy. We can't trust that the targets will be there. We'll see if they don't have DK Metcalf available. I still think it's funny, and I can't get over that Geno Smith has gotten to the point where it's like, yeah, of course he's a starting option this week against the Giants.
Yeah, he is. I mean, if you look at our rankings, he's inside the top 10. I do think Metcalf's absence hurts, obviously. But I mean, it's another good matchup. The Giants are 23rd in adjusted points allowed to quarterback. So I think Geno's ceiling is lowered without DK, but I think he's still, pretty safe bet. Like I'd play Geno over Daniel Jones pretty comfortably.
Yeah, he's got 2 games all year where he did not throw at least 2 touchdown passes. That includes last week where he lost Metcalf early, only attempted 27 passes. That was actually the third time this season that he's thrown fewer than 30 passes and still thrown for 2+ touchdowns.
Yeah, he's been a top 10 fantasy quarterback in 4 of his last 5 games now.
Good for him. And we get revenge game potential here against the Giants, the team that would not let him take over for Eli Manning.
That's right.
Kenneth Walker, I guess we should mention so people don't think we forgot about him, but you are starting him unless you are amazing at running back right now.
Yeah, the Giants are allowing 5.7 yards per carry through running back, so it's a great matchup. I also want to note that, Walker didn't see a target last week, but he ran her out on 62% of the pass plays. Now, Seattle, they are going to get Travis Homer back this week, it looks like, and he had been the one playing on passing downs before he got hurt. So I'll be interested to see if Walker loses pass routes to Homer. But man, if he stays up, 50 to 60% of the routes with their rushing production, he's going to be a top 10 fantasy back the rest of the way pretty easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had somebody ask me about trading away Kenneth Walker straight up for Dalvin Cook, and that's not a move that I could tell somebody to make right now.
No, I'd rather have Walker.
San Francisco at the Rams, Niners by 1.5, over under 43. Deebo Samuel, probably the biggest story to watch here. No practice Wednesday because of the hamstring injury. I believe he's in kind of day-to-day territory, right?
Yeah, that's what Shanahan said. So it doesn't seem super serious, but it definitely seems like there's a chance he doesn't play on Sunday. Juwan Jennings also missed practice on Wednesday with a hamstring. He's the 49ers number 3 receiver. So if both those guys are out, that would make, Brandon Ayuk much easier to trust in fantasy lineups, and it would only help George Kittle, who you're starting anyways.
Yeah, I think George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk are both fairly easy starts. Like I would much rather play Brandon Ayuk than Wan'Dale Robinson in that kind of range.
Yeah, it's fair. You definitely get the higher ceiling with Ayuk. He's seen 22% of the Niners targets since Garoppolo took over. So that's already a startable range. And then again, if Samuel's out, that should get a boost.
Jimmy Garoppolo, less attractive in football terms this week than he was last week. Obviously, otherwise, always plenty attractive. He's a usable guy, kind of in Andy Dalton territory in this one.
Yeah. The Rams 7th in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. Garoppolo has finished as a top 12 fantasy quarterback in 3 straight games now, but he finished quarterback 21 when he played the Rams back in week 4. He had 239 yards and 1 touchdown in that game. This I think, unlike last week where we thought it was going to be high scoring against the Chiefs, I think this is going to be a low scoring game against the Rams.
Yeah, I think Jimmy Garoppolo is a start him if you need to this week, as opposed to somebody to go get to start over another quarterback. He is also somebody that shows up in our Underdog Pick'em article. So he's got a number that he's gone over each of the past 3 weeks. So somebody that I have already bet on in that format this week, and somebody to play there, even if you don't want to or have to play him in fantasy. Christian McCaffrey, I would expect him to take over this backfield. We'll see exactly what taking over means in San Francisco, because that has not been a one guy controls everything backfield, but they've never had Christian McCaffrey before. I'm assuming that they made that trade to have him take over everything.
Yeah.
And this is a kind of matchup that should even feed into that, because the Rams have been tough on rushing this year. And obviously when you have McCaffrey, he's ready to do anything you need a running back to do.
Yeah, the Rams are first in adjusted points allowed to running back, so it's a tough matchup. Now, McCaffrey just played the Rams in week 6 as a member of the Panthers. He ran for 69 yards on 13 carries in that game, and he caught 7 passes for 89 yards. So we had, over 150 total yards in that game in a bad Panthers offense. McCaffrey played 22 snaps last week. I think he could, close to double that this week. I think he'll be ready for close to a full workload.
I would assume so as well. On the other side, no practice for Cam Akers for personal reasons. We'll see if he ends up on another team by this week. And I'm kind of surprised he hasn't been traded yet. Darrell Henderson, also no practice Wednesday because of an illness. So we'll see about him as well. Kyron Williams and Van Jefferson got designated to return from IR last week. Have you seen whether they expect or hope to have Kyren Williams actually play in this game?
McVay said he wants to wait on Kyren, basically said he won't play this week, and they might use the entire 21-day window to activate him. So it might be, not even next week for Kyren, but the following week. So he's just a stash in deeper leagues. I'm not even super excited about him once he's healthy. Like, he's not an exciting prospect. This running game sucks. Kyren's not going to take over everything. So stash him if you have room, but I'm not excited about him. It's going to be Darrell Henderson again this week, as long as the illness doesn't keep him out. Like, the playing time's going to be, the touches might be there, but again, I just don't think it's going to be efficient, especially against this pretty solid Niners run defense.
Yeah, defense does still look like it'll miss Eric Armstead. He wasn't practicing Wednesday, so we'll see about that. That hurts the defense. It also might be without Dre Greenlaw, who got hurt last week, the linebacker. So Henderson will at least be a volume-based play, assuming he's ready to go for this game. I would love to not have to play anything else besides Cooper Kupp on the Rams side.
Well, I think Tyler Higbee is still a nice starter. Last time out, his playing time and his volume was way down. I believe that was because of the ankle, though. He was questionable coming into that game. He is off the injury report this week, so I think he should be back to full playing time. He caught 10 of 14 targets against the against the 49ers when these teams met in week 4. So, not exciting, but as far as volume goes at the tight end position, you can't do a whole lot better than Higbee.
I would say 10 receptions is pretty exciting for a tight end.
Oh, yeah.
Washington at Indianapolis, Colts by 3 over under 39.5. This was supposed to be, Jared, Carson Wentz versus Matt Ryan and the team that quit on him after 1 year. Instead, we get Taylor Heineke versus Sam Ehlinger in a QB matchup that wouldn't even be exciting in the middle of a Saturday afternoon. So we'll start with the Washington side. Taylor Heineke was fine last week. We got over 200 yards passing. We got a nice touchdown to Terry McLaurin downfield, and we got McLaurin at least matching Curtis Samuel in targets, even if he still couldn't quite eclipse him.
Yeah, it was nice to see McLaurin's production and that target share, be higher than it had been with Carson Wentz. And Heineke himself even finished quarterback 13 on the week. PFF had him dead last by a pretty wide margin in their passing grade. So, he did not play well. We also had Washington go run heavy. They were -8% pass rate over expected. They were dead even. They were 0% with Carson Wentz over the first 6 games. So that definitely could be a trend, this team going run heavier with Heineke under center. So I still think the quarterback change is good news for Terry McLaurin. I think he's going to be better going forward than he was with Wentz.
Yeah, it can't be bad news. And every time that we talk about where our QB finished in scoring last week, we got to realize that it was a bad QB week. We only had 9 guys eclipse 20 fantasy points. Obviously, that's one scoring system, but it was a low QB scoring week last week. Logan Thomas put in a limited practice Wednesday, so maybe he'll be back from his calf injury. We'll see. Not sure that makes a whole lot of difference for my fantasy planning, even if he does make it back. Jahan Dotson did not practice Wednesday with his hamstring injury. Last week, he went limited, no practice Friday, questionable, then did not play in the game. So it seemed like he was trending toward playing, but he might have had some kind of setback or be a little further from playing right now.
Yeah, he did. There was video of him in last Thursday's practice pulling up on a route. So it looked like he re-injured that hamstring on Thursday. So I would expect him not to play in this game, which does make McLaurin and Samuel easier to trust. I think Brian Robinson is a sell high right now. He has benefited the past 2 weeks against the Bears and Packers from positive game script. He still only played 47% of the snaps in both of those games. And he's seen 56% of Washington's carries in those 2 games. That's a decent number, but it's not like a, controlling workhorse back carry share. So once Washington gets into games where they're not playing with the lead, and, they might play with the lead again in this one. So Robinson's an okay fantasy play, but just longer term over the rest of the season, I think I would be looking to get out from Robinson right now.
Yeah, not somebody that you have to get rid of, but I agree. Go ahead and sell high to a running back needy team. And Antonio Gibson has looked good alongside him. So the natural inclination is for fantasy folks to be like, free Antonio Gibson. Look how explosive he is. But if you think about it, he looked crappy before getting into his current role. Yeah. So maybe Washington just actually has him in the role now that he should be playing, which of course then speaks to keeping Brian Robinson in the role he's playing, not giving him more receiving, and the whole thing just being a bit more of a committee than we would like. So I agree. I don't think there's going to be big stuff ahead of Brian Robinson. I think Antonio Gibson is a good fit for how he's being used right now, which makes him fringely usable in deeper leagues, especially if he can steal a touchdown here or there. But, it looks like they're set up the way they want to be set up.
Yeah, Gibson had 10 carries and 4 targets last week. Again, Washington played with the lead throughout that game, so they ran it a bunch. But Gibson's in RB3 range in our ranking, so he's usable as a bye week option, especially.
Sam Ehlinger on the other side. I'm not sure if it's Ellinger or Ellinger. I'm going to go with Ehlinger. That's more likely. He was good in college, not amazing. 6th round pick, of course. Yeah. 7.7 career yards per attempt, 3.5 touchdowns per interception. He runs some. I did see it put out there this week that he has wheels, but he's under 50th percentile in quarterback speed, according to pre-draft testing. His player profiler comp is Chase Daniel. So I think that's probably the level of player we're talking about, that like Colt McCoy for expectation. We'll see. He could surprise people. He clearly at least has shown Frank Reich to this point that there's a chance he's better than Matt Ryan. So that's something. I'm not adjusting anything up or down for my Colts expectations this week with him in there.
Yeah, he was a fun college player at Texas, but he was like a college player where you're like, oh, this guy maybe could be a decent backup in the NFL. Now, like you said, the Colts obviously think he can be more than that. And Ehlinger did have a really good preseason, 24 of 29 for 289 yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 picks. He was 3rd among 77 qualifiers in PFF passing grade. Now, it's preseason. He's playing against backups and all that, but at least some promise there. And then, the rushing stuff. So we have 2 preseasons of Ehlinger. He has 137 snaps in those 2 preseasons, which is about 2 games worth. He has 126 rushing yards and a score in those 2 games. So he's a guy who might give us. He could give us like Daniel Jones level rushing production. It probably is like the best case, and we're not going to count on that right out of the gate. But I think that's the best case scenario. So it doesn't matter for fantasy outside of 2 quarterback and super flex leagues. But I'll be interested to see what he looks like this week.
The Washington matchup certainly gives him the opportunity to have this good game. Like it could, the upside could be a really good game. He does still have Jonathan Taylor, Naheem Hines, Michael Pittman. There's enough around him that he could have a really good fantasy outing against Washington and then have everybody tricked into heading into a trip to New England next week.
Yeah, I know he's 4K on DraftKings, so I'm sure we'll be talking about him at least a little bit on tomorrow's shows.
There you go. That's the place to use him. I'm not comfy enough to play him in pick'ems because I have no idea what to expect statistically. But 4K, I mean, all he has to do is not fall on his face, and he'll be just fine.
Yes.
Anything else from that game?
No. I mean, we'll just see what happens with the wideouts with the new quarterback. Like Paris Campbell has been super busy target-wise over the past 2 weeks after getting hardly any targets the first 4 or 5 games. But I guess Pittman's still in play as like a wide receiver 3, but I'd prefer just to kind of wait and see what it looks like with Ehlinger under center.
I'd probably have Pittman higher than 3 because I mean at this point, I don't have a reason to think that Sam Ehlinger is a downgrade from Matt Ryan, so I'm just going to kind of rely on Frank Reich saying that this is their best QB option going forward and try to play Michael Pittman. I mean, we've got him 27th. I think that's a fair range for him looking at the guys around him in the rankings. I certainly wouldn't argue for playing him over somebody like Gabe Davis, Deontay Johnson. But I think all those guys are in a similar range where I wouldn't be shocked if Michael Pittman, scores 10 spots above where we have him ranked.
Yeah. Washington is 31st in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. So it is a good matchup for all these wideouts.
Green Bay at Buffalo on Sunday night, which is not going to be a good matchup. Bills by 10.5. And really, if you can still find that, then go ahead and bet it because it's up to 11, even 11.5 in some places. I would not be at all surprised if it ends higher. The over-under is 47.5. The over-under is really just however many points the Bills will score in this game. Buffalo's average margin of victory this season is 15.8 points. That's their average margin of victory. The Packers' average margin is minus 2.6. So even if we just put those two together, we're talking about an 18.4 point line, which seems like it would be fair for this one because the Bills are very good and the Packers are very bad.
Yeah, 18.5 point implied total for Green Bay, which is
too high.
It might be. I mean, so it's Aaron Jones, and that's it for Packers. I would want to start in this game. It looks like Allen Lazard's going to miss this game with the shoulder injury he suffered last week. He would have been like a fringy wide receiver 3 if he plays, but that's it. It's Aaron Jones who, again, for the second time in 3 weeks did control the backfield, both in terms of snaps and touches over A.J. Dillon, especially in the passing game. I mean, the Packers clearly made it a point to get Jones going in the passing game last week. He had 10 targets, and especially if Lazard is out, like I think, he's a pretty good target bet again on Sunday night.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would also point out that the Packers have already fallen short of 18 points 3 times this year against the Jets, Buccaneers, and Vikings. I agree. Aaron Jones, absolutely nothing else. We had no Allen Lazard in practice Wednesday, as you said. Christian Watson was limited with the hamstring, so we'll see if he's ready to play. Sammy Watkins, limited, but that's with the injury that he came back from last week, so probably a maintenance day. Maybe we get some Sammy Watkins revenge game vibes here, Jared. I'm just not sure what that means at this point or how much you can do on 4 targets.
Yeah, Romeo Doubs is really struggling, and Aaron Rodgers is starting to get frustrated with him. You can see it if you watch the games. Doubs has 26 targets over the last 4 games. He's turned them into 97 yards. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity for Watkins and maybe even Christian Watson, if he gets healthy, to step into bigger roles going forward. But we'll kind of monitor it on Sunday night, but I would not play any of these Packers wideouts against the Bills.
It's also worth noting that Aaron Rodgers did not practice Wednesday with his right thumb injury. I don't think that he's in danger of missing the game, but the fact that he's not practicing on Wednesday at the same time where he's saying everybody needs to work on stuff, that means that the right thumb is not nothing.
Yeah, the previous 2 weeks he's gone no practice Wednesday, full Friday or full Thursday and Friday. So I'd expect the same thing, but it's definitely possible that thumb has been an issue these last 2 games.
He's definitely not hurting it by giving his teammates a thumbs up at this point. That's for sure. On the Buffalo side, you're starting everybody that you're actually considering. I want to see if Khalil Shakir takes away some Isaiah McKenzie playing time coming out of the bye.
Me too. I'd like to see that. I would not trust either of them this week. I think they're both worth stashing on benches. Dawson Knox, last time out against the Chiefs, 80% route rate. That was easily a season high. He's off the injury report now. So he's a good play because he's like a close to full-time player in this offense. He's still not a great target bet. He's just not earning targets this season, but he's outside the top, handful of tight ends. He's, as good of a touchdown bet as you're going to get at the position.
Yeah. And that's what we're looking for most of the time outside of like the top 6. Cincinnati at Cleveland on Monday night to close this out. Bengals by 3.5 on the road, over under 47. Browns are bad at defense. 27th in rush defense DVOA, 28th against the pass. The Bengals did lose to them in both meetings last year, but the first came in week 2 before the Bengals really knew what they were doing. Second came in week 18 when the Bengals were resting their starters. They're coming off a big one this time against Atlanta. I'm certainly not concerned about anything on the Bengals offense against these Browns.
So the Bengals, the last 2 weeks, plus 21% and plus 23% pass rate over expected. For comparison, the Chiefs lead the league right now at plus 13%. So the Bengals have gone super pass heavy over the last 2 weeks. Finally, it's worked. Joe Burrow has finished quarterback 1 in fantasy points in both of those games. So that's obviously good news for Burrow, Higgins, Chase, obvious starters. I think Tyler Boyd, if the Bengals remain, they're not going to remain that pass heavy, but if they're like a top 3 pass rate over expected team, I think Tyler Boyd can be like a weekly wide receiver 3 going forward. And it's obviously good news for Hayden Hurst too, if the Bengals keep throwing this much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, Tyler Boyd's going to be that guy in territory of like wide receiver 30 to 40, where if everybody's getting 6 targets, he's the one that you want to bet on.
Yes, exactly.
On the Browns side, the Bengals, meanwhile, 7th in pass defense DVOA, 10th against the run. So that is a defense that you want to worry about, guys. Going against a little bit. 5th toughest by our adjusted fantasy points allowed on quarterbacks. 4th toughest on wide receivers. Negative for running backs and tight ends as well. So, I mean, you're playing Nick Chubb in this game. You're probably playing Amari Cooper. Not sure that you're really playing anybody else beyond that.
Yeah, I don't think so. Kareem Hunt's snap rate and like route rate have been in line the past 2 weeks versus where it was early in the season, but he has just 9 total carries and 3 targets over the past 2 weeks. I don't know exactly what's going on there, but I would not want to use him in fantasy lineups this week, especially like you said, in this bad matchup. No David Njoku for the Browns for the next 2 to 5 weeks was the report we got. Very, very sad. He's been awesome for us. That leaves Harris. How much of Njoku's role he actually takes over. Maybe he's worth stashing in deeper leagues, but Njoku's absence should only help Amari Cooper's target share.
Yeah, that's for sure. The Bengals on offense, by the way, have finally gotten down to being a near neutral matchup for fantasy defense. So the way that they started the season made it look like they were a positive scoring matchup for defenses for a while. I certainly don't think that's the case at this point.
I still think they're a good sack bet, but like if your fantasy league deducts for points allowed, then not so good.
Even that though, they're like middle of the league or below middle of the league in pressure rate allowed at this point. So they've even improved on that in that area.
Yeah, that's fair. But it's just, again, if they're going to be dropping back 50 times a game, that's more sack opportunities.
For sure. Anything else from that game?
That'll do it.
That's going to do it for the Week 8 preview edition of the podcast. You become a BS. No, don't do that. Become a DS insider today. If you want to see exactly how we rank all these guys against each other for Week 8 and who we'd recommend starting in your lineup in this weekend. Our second Dynasty Buy, Sell, Hold report of the year hit the site Wednesday, so check that out. You can find Jared's weekly usage report to see all the notes we've got on how often these guys are taking the field, who's getting the route rates and all of that. We've got free reads on the website, so you don't have to be a DS Insider to get some value there. Go check out my top plays for the Underdog Pick'ems article. I mentioned it earlier, 96 and 54 for the year. Those are just highlighted players based on gaps in the underdog line and our weekly projections. You can also find Timmy Hernandez's pass rate over expected. We've talked about that number several times on this show. You can look at the whole thing, pretty chart with all the team logos and everything, more than I'm capable of doing on a computer. So go to ds.com, whether you are a DS Insider or not. If you want to support us otherwise, subscribe, rate, review, follow the podcast wherever you prefer to get them, and visit the sponsors in the links down below. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.